All right, so let's keep going with third parties. We're going to talk about some recent impacts they've had on elections and in the political world. Usually, third parties rally around a strong personality, um, but they usually don't last very long. The first one I remember in my lifetime, H. Ross Perot, who was a oil tycoon from Texas, ran for president in '92 and '96. Um, he actually made a lot of impact on that election. He ran as an independent. He had no political experience. He was a successful businessman. Sounds familiar? Um, Now, the thing about him was he was a very anti-democrat, anti-republican. Um, However, he tended, as a businessman and with his ideas, he pulled from Republicans. The election '92, that was the one he had the most influence on. That was George H. Bush versus Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton wasn't all that popular. He had a lot of scandals around him. But the votes that Ross Perot got mostly came from Republicans. So most people feel like Bill Clinton being elected was impacted by Ross Perot more than anything. Ron Paul, right here, he ran in 2012. He was extremely popular. It's another one of those things where we saw this with Bernie Sanders. Ron Paul is pretty old, relatively speaking, but he was very much a uh, monetary guy. The money in our country, influences politics. It's all corrupt. He was extremely popular, but again, he probably tended to pull as a libertarian for more from Republicans. Um, and in 2012, we saw the second election of Barack Obama. This last year, Gary Johnson, he was probably the most influential. He's the one right here. He ran as a libertarian. He also ran with a really strong running mate. Most of the time, running mates are just chosen to try to get a few other voters from other areas. Like, Trump didn't have political experience, so he chose as a running mate someone with a lot of political experience. Hillary felt like maybe her weakness was there was men out there who maybe didn't want a woman president, so she picked a strong male vice president. And we see this all the time. Vice presidents don't have a lot of influence, but people, they try to pick up other voters where they maybe see, I can't get this type of voter, so I'm going to have a VP that can maybe pull them in. Gary Johnson, who was a governor from New Mexico, which is a blue state, ran with Bill Weld, who was a successful two-term governor from Massachusetts, which is an extremely blue state. And even though the people who knew them loved them, they were doomed. And we'll talk about why they really had no chance. And then obviously Bernie Sanders, who ran as a Democrat, but he's actually a lifelong independent. But again, you can't win as an independent in the political culture right now, so he ran as a Democrat. He was extremely successful. When he first started, he was polling at like 5-10% by the time it was over. He was pretty much neck and neck with Hillary. We found out later that the Democratic Party actually was kind of doing things to try to make sure Hillary won. It was kind of an ugly thing. The Democrats also have something in their political party process called superdelegates. These are elected people who get their own vote, and all the superdelegates were with Hillary from the beginning. So even though Bernie Sanders he was riding the momentum, most people feel like if they had the same process as a Republican primary, Bernie Sanders would have been the nominee. Here's some. Ralph Nader ran in 2000 in the Green Party. We'll talk about the Green Party in just a second. He ran in 2004 as an independent. He pulled from the left, meaning in 2000 it was Al Gore and George W. Bush. He definitely took more away from Al Gore. Again, in 2004, it was John Kerry and George W. Bush, and he definitely pulled more from John Kerry, who was the Democrat. Now, some obstacles that they have as far as not making any inroads into, especially the presidential election. There are independents in Congress, but not very many. First of all, third-party candidates, they have to get a lot of signatures to get on the ballot. The process for that, Republicans don't have to do that, and Democrats don't have to do that because they're an established party. They also have trouble raising money. A lot of people think third-party candidates are a waste of my vote. They have no chance of winning, so why am I going to give money to them? Major parties push the idea of they're a wasted vote. Even in this last election, President Obama came out and said, please don't vote for Gary Johnson or Jill Stein because a lot of people wanted to vote for one of them because they just disliked Hillary and Trump so much that they're like, I want to protest. So I'm going to protest by voting for one of these candidates. And the big parties push, don't do that. It's a wasted vote. Split vote. A lot of people don't like third parties because they split the vote. We saw that with Ross Perot. We saw that with Ron Paul, where they pulled from a certain political party, which ended up costing them the vote. Difficult time getting into presidential debates. This was a huge one this election cycle, especially for Gary Johnson. During the Republican primaries, they had 17 candidates in the running. All of them were able to get on TV. Some of them had to do like a secondary one, but they all were able to get on there. In this one, they were required to have 15% they were supposed to poll at 15% in order to get on the debate stage. Gary Johnson got up to, I think, 12 at one point. But if he can't get on the debate stage, he has zero chance. Because even though I pay a lot of attention to this, a lot of people pay attention to this, there's a lot of Americans who don't really pay attention to the presidential race until the last couple months, and that's with the presidential debates. And nobody knew who Jill Stein or Gary Johnson was because they weren't in the debates. And another obstacle is most of the third parties focus on one or two issues. So, the 2016 independents. Here's a couple. One, the 2016 independents. This is going to be difficult because you have a PDF version of this. The first one is Gary Johnson. Here's an article I think that was really interesting, talking about, again, how third-party candidates ultimately got Donald Trump elected. Because they feel like they didn't make a dent in the Electoral College, but they did post a significant enough showing in several states to help Donald Trump. Based on where they did the best, they ended up swinging the election. And most experts believe that, again, that there's a really good chance that they did pull enough votes to sway the election for Donald Trump. So Gary Johnson, he ended up getting 3.8 million votes, which is 3% of the voting, those that voted. Again, he's a two-term governor from New Mexico. Like I said before, libertarians tend to focus on, I want the government out of my life as little as possible. A little more isolationist, meaning we shouldn't be getting involved in these wars overseas, which most Americans agree with. Most Americans are for fiscal responsibility of the government, and most Americans are for socially accepting, meaning the government shouldn't tell us that homosexuals can't get married. It's up to us. Keep the government out of my life. The other third party who got some attention this year was Jill Stein. She got 1.2 million votes, which was 1%. The one thing I found really interesting about Jill Stein as I looked, and it says failing upwards, she's been running for office for quite some time. Where is it at? She ran for governor, House, Secretary of Commonwealth, a representative, a gubernatorial candidate again, and she's lost all these elections. So I found it really kind of strange that even though she's never won an election, she became the candidate. But her major hiccup was the fact that the Green Party tends to focus on green issues. Now, they have stances on all the other major issues, and they've moved more towards a well-rounded party, but they still tend to focus on things like climate change, things having to do with, and that's why it's called the Green Party. She had an issue because she wasn't on the ballot in all 50 states, which makes it very difficult. And she got into some trouble along the way, um, dealing with the Dakota Access Pipeline, so that was really controversial. Um, but to be honest, neither one of these candidates had a chance at the beginning. But a lot of people are hoping that with Gary Johnson's, pretty decent showing, with the anger over Clinton and Trump being the party's nominees when they were extremely unlikable. People either really liked Hillary and Trump or they could not stand them. So a lot of people feel like maybe there'll be some blowback from the Trump presidency, as he's having a lot of controversy and he's extremely polarizing. I mean, his supporters are all in with him, and everyone else basically thinks he is a terrible president and he's awful for our country. So a lot of people are hoping that that pushback will allow some of these third parties to maybe actually, have a chance in the future. If not at president, maybe at least, they might have a chance at some congressional seats at the national level or state level. We're going to stop there for now. We'll finish it up on the next one.